Me. Sorry about that. Hello, everybody. This is Rebecca Kocsis here with CHEA of California and Nathan Pierce from Family Protection Ministries. Thanks for joining us, Nathan.
Thanks for having me. It's
hello, everybody. This is Rebecca Kocsis here with CHEA of California and Nathan Pierce from Family Protection Ministries. Sorry about that. I had a feeling that was going to happen. Nathan, thank you for joining me today. I know we have our standing broadcast at the end of every month, but thank you so much. I know you are very busy these days.
Yep, glad to be here. Glad to be here.
So 3 weeks left for the legislative session. So you obviously have all hands on deck there at your office.
Yep, it's busy.
I bet. So, I want to talk about some of the things that your office and our office have been encountering here as we head into the beginning of another school year. Unfortunately, there's no end of guidances or instructions from our government to public and private schools that just have a way of trickling down and affecting our homeschool programs because we fall under the private school statutes. So one of the big things that we're seeing is, how do our homeschool co-ops and PSP class days conduct themselves? Are they bound by the guidances that are given to the public and private schools? Do teachers have to be vaccinated? Do the children and teachers as well need to have masks on? How do we help the families?
Sure, yeah. And these are all important questions because they impact a lot of people.
Right.
And so let's start with the mask mandate. There have been multiple guidance documents issued. One several weeks ago, and we'll have links to these below the video so that you can take a look at them yourself later. But initially, we had a mask mandate that went out to public and private schools. We had a vaccine mandate for teachers of public and private schools. That was a little bit later. So what we're looking at is mandates that apply to campus schools, campus public schools, including charter schools, and campus private schools. And that would include a campus private school that has a homeschool program that has classes at their campus. It wouldn't necessarily require somebody that's part of a homeschool program that's just doing everything that they do for teaching at home. If they're completely at home, then it wouldn't impact them. But
so it doesn't impact single family private schools at all.
Right. It would not impact single family private schools. If you file your own private school affidavit for your family, it's not going to impact you. However, if you are part of a co-op that's part of a PSP or another school, then that's when it could start impacting you. And the reason is because it impacts schools that have a facility or a campus where we have students going in to have class days or co-ops or whatever you might want to call it. There's definitely a plethora of names these days. And so if your school, the more it looks like a typical campus school, the more likely that education scenario is going to be impacted by this guidance. One area that isn't covered currently by the guidance is if there's a co-op, say you've got 5 or 100 families that each file their own private school affidavit, but maybe some of them get together for a science class once a week, or maybe some of them get together for multiple classes throughout the week. If they're not a school, it doesn't technically apply to them. Even if it does look like a school, but it's not a school, it doesn't apply to them because it's not a school and the guidance is specifically for a school.
Great.
However, if it's a PSP that is a school and has a bunch of families as part of their PSP, and that PSP has their own class day that's part of the PSP, hosted by the PSP, and functions under the authority of the PSP, then that class day or co-op would be under the guidance. So so if you find yourself somewhere in between one of these, I would encourage you to talk to one of the attorneys at HSLDA just to get some more information, help them, that they can help you think through some questions and figure out where you fall with regard to the impact of those guidance documents.
Now, the mask mandate is different from the teacher's vaccine mandate. And the teacher's vaccine mandate was tied very closely, as you had told me before, to facility. So just set aside the masks and let's just talk about the teacher's vaccine mandate. Now and thankfully teachers have the option to do COVID-19 testing instead of the vaccine. But that was just a little bit different from the mask mandate.
Right. It's specifically focused on facilities, a school facility. So if a teacher is going to a facility and teaching there to students, a live class, then that teacher would need to be able to show a proof of vaccination or testing, as you mentioned. But if they're not teaching in person, even if they have a class, but their class is not in person, then it doesn't appear that any guidance right now is going to require them to be vaccinated. It's somewhat the same as with some of the orders for state employees to get vaccinated, where if there's still some question about, what if they never go into the office? Well, if you think about it from a public health standpoint, and their idea of how to keep people safe is vaccinations for those that are in a group of people. If there's somebody that's at home not interacting with somebody in person, that's not what they're going after. They're going after the teachers that go into a facility, and not just teachers, but at school administration staff too. So we're not just talking with this mandate for vaccines. We're not just talking about teachers only. It's also school staff. If they're in the office at the facility there, then that rule applies to them as well. Now,
and that's if they're working with other people. I know I am aware of PSPs, and I used to have one that had a school office. We had a physical office. Most of the time there were only two of us there, but once a week or so there would be a handful of us. So if you have a PSP with a school office, you perhaps would fall under that guidance, even if you're never working with the students in your PSP.
That is possible, although in that situation, it's kind of on the thinner end of I would say not being as likely to be a concern to the health department. So though it does technically fall under it, I would say that it is possible that would not fall under something that they would be saying would be enforceable. But again, I'm not the attorney that you should be talking to. You should be talking with somebody at HSLDA if you have that specific of a question.
Okay. All right. And the more, I think of most groups, there are lots of groups that use a facility on a weekly basis. And I realize that's probably, they're the ones that, they're going to look like they're having school,
Right.
But if you have your PSP and you've got science class in the Smith family backyard, or if you have your PE day at the park, these things they're not at a specific school related facility, probably doesn't even look like school traditional education is taking place. A lot of homeschool scenarios don't look like your traditional education.
That's so true. Place.
Yeah. So they're less inclined to draw the, I don't want to say attention, but to draw the the ire of the health department. Right.
They're not going to see as many people being concerned over it, whether people outside the health department making a phone call to the health department or somebody in the health department looking at it, because they do have, as many government agencies right now, they have their hands full with a lot of big issues. And
Right.
so these small things like that aren't as big of an issue in most areas, at least.
Mhm. Right, right. Okay, well, that's good. And I hope that that sets many, many families' minds at ease. But we've got the whole vaccine mandate and the mask mandate. And ultimately, though, private Christian home education is still, your single family private schools are still your most free educational option, isn't
Yeah.
it? There's,
Yeah.
there,
And I think that's something that we probably don't appreciate enough, either here in California or across the country. We do have a lot of freedom in how we can home educate here in California. And it is a freedom that's not just, it hasn't happened by accident. It's not this thing that's just existed sort of in the background and nobody's ever done anything about it. There has been a lot of work that's gone into defending that freedom, as you know, with CHEA being sort of the center point of that in the early years of back in the 1980s, needing to have protection for private home education. That was one of the things that CHEA was founded for. And it's been nearly almost 40 years.
yes.
Next year, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, I mean, I think it's really important to remember that we do have a lot of freedom in our private homeschooling in California, and that's been some hard-won freedom, and it's hard maintained freedom as well. Things keep coming up,
Absolutely.
and we all have to take part in that if we want it to exist for next year or the next generation, to be able to have that same level of freedom. And it is, as we've seen, a lot of these mandates come up over the last year and a half, 2 years. Homeschooling at home, private homeschooling, has been the same and functioned very well throughout that time period. And we're seeing a number of people join the band of private homeschoolers in California. Those numbers have been bolstered this year and last year, because people do see the value in that freedom. They see that they can do what is best for their children with that option when another option isn't working. So I think it's something that we need to remember and be appreciative of, and be willing to step up and make a sacrifice here and there to maintain that freedom. And that's what we're here to do with Freedom Friday. That's what CHEA exists for. That's what FPM is here for too. So glad to be part of that.
Yeah. And I do think of our many, many new families that have joined our ranks because of the pandemic, and not knowing how we got here. Why is it that they can file a private school affidavit and teach their children at home? And I would encourage them to look into the history of private homeschooling and how we got here. They may not be even thinking about that. As you said, it's easy for us to take it for granted because right now we have these freedoms, but I think it's important to remember that when you're homeschooling privately, when you file that private school affidavit, you're stepping aside from the government's system. And for many families, I understand that that's a revolutionary and wild, big step to take. It was for us, many years ago, but you're stepping aside from the government. But when you step aside and step outside of those government auspices, the world is wide open for you. You no longer have to ask for permission to, if a particular material is okay to use, or if your children no longer have to do standardized testing. You're able to set your own schedule, set the number of days and your school hours, and suddenly it is, the world's your, what does they call it? The world's your oyster.
Yeah, and the sky's the limit on what you can choose to use or do to educate children.
Right. And the parents, we firmly believe that parents know what's best. And when you're in a position where parents, you can make those decisions for your children without worrying about it meeting somebody else's standards. Um, what's best for your kids. So
Right.
anyway, we could talk about homeschool freedom for a long time here. But I know we still have other things on our list we need to
We
cover.
do. We do.
So last summer, the CDE issued some guidance to LEAs that was very confusing, and it made it difficult for families to remove their children from the public school and start homeschooling them. And it had specifically to do with filing the private school affidavit. And so we saw in June, and I'm going to put the links again, as Nathan said, we'll put the links to these in the comments below. But we saw an encouraging, notice in June giving specific instructions that are more consistent with the legislation. And now we've gotten a new set of instructions or guidance that was released on August 16th. And that one specifically, should really seal the deal for families having an easy transition. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It is definitely a step in the right direction. They're consistent more with the law when it comes to private homeschooling, private schools in general, and transferring students from a public school to a private school. And when we're talking about private home education, we're talking about parents either joining a private school satellite program or an umbrella program of some kind where a school already exists and you're joining with that school. Or we're talking about where a parent files their own private school affidavit after they have decided, I'm going to create my own private school and I'm going to take responsibility for the education in that private school. And I'm going to tell the state, yes, I am verifying with you through this affidavit that we are a school, we are in compliance with the laws, and we are fulfilling all of our obligations in teaching and in presenting this information to the state. We're verifying that that school exists already. It's not an application. It's telling the state that our school already exists. So those two options, the PSP and the single family private school, we did have some issues last year with public schools saying when a parent went into a public school to transfer their child to a single family private school, normally is where we ran into this issue. The public school official would say, well, no, you can't do that. Or they would say, maybe you can't do that unless you file the affidavit first. Right. Or they've said some version of those two things. Either you just can't, or you have to file your affidavit first. And HSLDA did a whole lot of juggling of these things, and it talked with both school administrators and superintendents, as well as some folks at the state level. I know we spoke with folks at the state level, as well as superintendents and school officials as well. And there's a lot of confusion about that. And the CDE last year kind of didn't help with that when they issued some guidance that really wasn't in line with how the law is structured. And it confused a lot of folks at the at public schools with whether or not they're even allowed to let homeschoolers withdraw their children and enroll them in a private school. So this year, a lot of work under the bridge, a lot of relationship building under the bridge. Now we have this guidance from the CDE specifically telling school districts and schools that they need to allow parents to withdraw their students, and that they can create their own private school. And not only that, but the private school affidavit gets filed in October. Yay, they got that right. Yes. That's great. Yes. So parents in October can file that, and they don't have to wait until October to withdraw their students from public school. If they've decided that's what's best for their kids, they can do that today and start homeschooling right away, and not need to file that document until October, which is the proper time to file it, from October 1st to 15th. That document is up on the CDE's website. It's easy to file. And it's a legal requirement for following when you have a private school that you're operating, whether that private school is in your own home or at a campus somewhere.
Mhm.
So that
Right.
guidance is great, and it's, I think, going to be really helpful to a number of, not just the school districts and school administrators, but it's going to be helpful to homeschool families that find, hopefully, a more streamlined, smooth process of transferring their children to private homeschooling.
Absolutely. We were very, like you, we were very thankful to see those specific instructions. And for families that are watching us that are going to be filing a private school affidavit this year, between October 1st and 15th, CHEA will have specific instructions on how to do that on our website. But also October 5th, we'll be having our PSA filing party. It's a virtual meeting, and we invite all of you to come and join us. And by the end of the meeting, during the meeting, we'll be going through the step-by-step instructions on how to file your private school affidavit. And by the end of the meeting, you will have, if you've followed along with us, successfully filed your private school affidavit. So you don't need to worry about going it alone. It really isn't hard to do. Because it's foreign to many people, it seems a little intimidating. I know parents are concerned that if they don't do it correctly, they'll be breaking the law. And of course, that's not going to happen. And you're not going to be breaking the law. We can go through it with you and make sure that it's done correctly. So we're excited about that coming up. That's probably one of the big questions we've been having lately is, when is the filing party? When is the filing party?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I'll put the date and the link to register for that in the comments below too. And I was surprised. I woke up, I think it was yesterday morning, to many texts on my phone from CHEA staff saying, what's this with AB 450? Was it 455? I think that's it.
Right.
AB 455, and they're packing their kids up. They're heading up to Sacramento because they're so distressed by the language in this bill. But can you clarify that a little bit?
Sure.
It's not really specifically the language of the bill yet. We probably should talk about what is the content of this distressing.
Sure. So we can talk about both of those things. I saw this language first on Wednesday evening, and I was pretty, in a sense, I was shocked by it, but in another sense, I was kind of waiting for something like this, as you probably were too, to some degree. I feel like a lot of people have been kind of waiting for something like this. There's been a lot of talk about a vaccine mandate across the board, or to some degree in various other places. And like we just talked about, we've seen it in schools for teachers. So what's the next step? And this particular bill, AB 455, is currently a bill dealing with transportation. And it's what happened on Wednesday was that a document was released that's not it's not an actual bill, it's an amendment draft. And so this amendment draft is a proposal to change that transportation bill to a vaccine mandate bill. Kind of some different topics there. You're not technically supposed to do that, but it happens all the time. So so that's kind of unfortunate, but that is what it is. So looking at the content of this this proposed language, which is not in the bill yet, but could be at any time, that it could get put into the bill, right this moment or next week. We don't really know. There's not much time left in the session, so it could happen very soon, or it could happen at the last day of the session. It's really hard to say when that could happen. It's theoretically possible that it won't happen, but there has been some noise about this subject in terms of people posting things on Facebook. One of the authors of the bill has posted on Facebook that she thinks that it ought to be something in a bill that gets passed, and that we should mandate vaccines. So the content specifically of this proposed language addresses a mandate for vaccines for entering certain buildings. So for going inside of certain businesses, and there's a lot of different things listed. And one way that one person put it, I thought was clever. It was everything except for churches and grocery stores. And that's, I would
I
say,
saw that.
that's not probably, there might be some other things that aren't in there, but it has a pretty long list of what places you would be required to have a vaccine for. So I think it's a reasonable way of explaining it, that yeah, it does pretty much require you to have a vaccine for everything in life except for grocery stores and church. So and my understanding, as I see it, is that it's very similar to what they had in France not long ago, and now they're in France requiring vaccines to go in the grocery store. So it's not seen yet how this would be enforced, although parts of this bill specifically spell out that businesses would be held accountable and be told to enforce it themselves at their own cost, including when they require their employers to get vaccinated. They're anticipating that that employee will be sick from the vaccine, so the employer has to make sure that they cover their sick pay during being sick from the side effects of receiving the vaccine. So so they have thought through at least parts of this extensively, and I don't know how they expect to be able to do this, but the bill includes what's called an urgency statute, and that means it goes into effect immediately upon being signed by the governor. So that means there's no window of, okay, let's prepare for this, and in 3 months we'll be in full enforcement. No, it's saying in the bill that it would be in effect immediately. And so I don't see how that could physically happen, how that would work, but that's in there. So typically when something like this gets proposed, it gets thrown into a bill. I'm not speaking about something like a mandate, a vaccine mandate. I'm talking about bills, legislatively speaking. From a practical standpoint, when something like this gets proposed, gets put into a bill, it's probably not the final version. Especially something this complicated, and with as many different people that are going to be interested in how this works out, there's probably going to be multiple versions of this bill before it gets to the governor's desk, if it makes it that far. So it could be worse, by the time it gets there. It could be, not as bad theoretically, but just be aware that it could be very much changed by the time it gets to the governor's desk. And then theoretically, it could move very quickly. It could be, on the governor's desk. I don't think it could be there today, but it could be on the governor's desk by Monday and signed into law theoretically. That's not normal, though.
Not normal. Okay. So there's no need for this to go through committees.
Well, it should go through committees. But at the end of the session, frequently what happens with committees is that they sort of meet in a way that's not necessarily on the regular schedule for committees, because they're trying to finish up business that's unresolved. Sometimes you have bills that go back and forth from one house to the other, and they get amended in both sides. And sometimes at the last minute, they decide, there was enough of a change to this bill that it really ought to go back to the Health Committee or the Judiciary Committee to just double check this language with them. And so those kind of committee hearings that are sort of really quickly set up do happen at the tail end of the session, which we're approaching rapidly right now, where they will verify or double check language, or even make more amendments, even in those last days of the session. So we could see it go through committees, but it may not be what we normally expect or talk about as a committee hearing.
Okay. So it's not an obligatory process like it would be if it had started out as this vaccine mandate instead of the transportation issue, because that went through the committee hearings.
Yeah.
So,
there's a number of things that, and it could just get waivers depending on on what those that are in leadership positions in the two different houses want to do with it, they could just waive various rules to get it through faster. So it remains to be seen how that's going to go through the process.
Okay. Well, it's distressing. I know it's not specifically homeschool related, but every ministry, that we all have to operate as a business as well, is going to be affected. Every single, citizen of the state of California is going to be affected by that. And so I bring it up because I know there's some misinformation swirling around about about it out there. So thanks for clarifying that and letting us know what to be watching for as that moves along. And that just brings me to, our last point is we want to talk just a little bit about the recall election coming up, because if you're weary of these emergency powers, and if you're weary of the government's endless regulations and mandates, it's something to take into consideration as we look at the recall election coming up next month. So
yeah, and we always want to encourage people to be involved in advocacy in general, but voting is a really critical part of that. We can't just be involved in hearings at the Capitol or making phone calls to our legislators, although those things are extremely important. We need to also be involved in putting people in office that will be friendly towards what we believe is right for our families. And so as we look at homeschooling, we have had a number of legislators over the years that have been more friendly towards homeschooling than others. And so it matters who gets elected. And that's no less the case here with the next election. We would encourage you definitely to vote and to look at other things that you might be willing to engage on in politics in the future as you consider carefully the things that are going to be on the ballot both this year and next year. There's people that are running for office at the state level right now. This is about the governor's position. That's a statewide office. There are a lot of other offices, both at the state level with, your state assembly members, state senators, as well as our federal representatives in DC. But there's also people that are at a more local level that can also have an impact. And we've seen that probably more than at a lot of other times in the past. Just in the last year and a half, we've seen how important some of those more local races are, whether it's a local sheriff that gets elected to office and how they function with their office. We have, people that are elected to the county board of supervisors, and a lot of people never really knew what that was until the last year. And so we're seeing more in a real sense how much impact voting on these people can really have. And so it's important to consider that. And this election is certainly something that's very significant and may not just have short-term impact. It may have long-term impact as well. So consider carefully that. And I would encourage you to spread that around to other people too that may not be watching today. Spread that information out. Encourage them that it may not just be something that impacts a small number of issues. This could be extremely wide-ranging impacts that would impact families for not just this next year, but for many years and even generations to come. So I would take this election very seriously.
Absolutely, and because we really aren't just talking about the pandemic and the emergency powers, but there's so many other critical points at stake. So so okay, well, thank you so much, Nathan. I appreciate your help on this. And I did want to say, you mentioned that next year is CHEA's 40th anniversary, but Family Protection Ministries is celebrating right now, right? This is your 35th anniversary.
Our 35th anniversary this year. Yeah, we were started in 86 and have been fighting for homeschool freedom ever since. So yeah, we're really excited to be where we are right now and to be able to just look back at some of the things that God has done.
It is wonderful. It's something to rejoice over and praise him. I'll be putting a link to your video in the comments as well, so everybody else can celebrate with you and get up, and see what Family Protections Ministries has been doing since 1986 on their behalf. So, well, as usual, Nathan, I so appreciate you joining us. And thank you for explaining so carefully and in an easy to understand manner all of the complicated things that we have been encountering lately.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody. And God bless your weekend. We'll see you again next month.